And so, in fact, with the Jordan Peterson thing, I'll leave him alone after this. But it's like, you want to talk about psychopaths? Like, sir, you were on record saying, give them hell. That was your response. And, for the guy who talks about hell all the time.
Yeah, right.
There's, you don't think hell it really exists? It does. You haven't met enough. Yeah, go to Gaza. Hell does exist. You said give them hell, and that's exactly what they got. Like,
hello, everybody. My name is Peter Wiggin, and welcome back to another video. In this one, we have a clip of Nick Fuentes and Dave Smith. They finally got back on a podcast together. I've been waiting for this for like 6 months. I don't know why they haven't done anything sooner. They've had a bit of beef on Twitter here and there, but in this podcast, you'll see that they squashed that beef. I have a link to the full podcast in the description or in the comment section. Go watch the whole thing. It's like 3.5 hours long. It's well worth your time, though. Anyway, let's get into this video.
It is the thing of the moment, which is that there's been this explosion of inquiry and conversation about Israel, about the Jews, conspiracy surrounding that, the nature of it. The big question I always get asked on my show is like, what is it? What is this thing that's going on? And the reason that this is happening is because the taboo has gone away. There's a few things. There's simultaneously the censorship around the topic has dissipated, and then I think right after, the taboo went away, largely because of the war in Gaza. I think people were so outraged it kind of blew the lid on that. And now that kind of is the central question of the role that these personalities play in mediating that. Because I think there's, at this point, a recognition by everybody on the whole planet. There's no denial anymore. Nobody can avoid it. Even Netanyahu's doing damage control with Shapiro. I think that was yesterday. That everybody is talking about this. Everyone's furious. Everyone does not have that conventional pro-Israel thing anymore. And now I feel like there are people like a Peterson or a Shapiro or even a Charlie Kirk, which I'm sure we'll get into, that are trying to they recognize that the reality has already changed.
Yeah.
But they are in denial in a sense, trying to negotiate like what that's going to look like, because they recognize the old consensus is gone, not coming back. People are not going to be pro-Israel like they were. The genie's not going back in the lamp, the proverbial lamp. But they also recognize that, is there a limiting principle to the conversation? Is there something outside the Overton window? And if you've lost all your credibility, how can you now step in and say, okay, we were lying before, but now go no further? Right. And I think it's an open question where it goes from here that everybody's asking.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there's, with a lot of those guys, I think there was just a moment that was, and I didn't plan on the Douglas Murray thing being that, I'm a libertarian, so I'm half autistic. Like, I'm a day walker, which is why I'm the best libertarian, but I'm half that. And so I just went, oh, dude, we're going to debate the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine. This is great. Like, this is going to be a huge show. It'll be, and I did not expect it to become a referendum on experts and the new media, partially just because it was such a bad strategy for Douglas. I mean, it was a way to avoid the debate that I think he thought he couldn't win.
Right.
But it wasn't, it was obviously not going to work out well. But one of the things that was kind of interesting in seeing all of these people, especially this, kind of why Jordan Peterson coming in was interesting, because he is really, to a lot of people, like, he's almost, especially with young people, who's the core group who Israel's losing. Well, this is a guy who really shaped a lot of young people's minds. And so if anybody was kind of positioned to be able to reel them back in, it might be him. And even that didn't kind of work. And I think something fundamental to it was that it was like with all these guys, with Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, your whole calling card was, we have these conversations. We don't shut voices out. You have to win the argument. We're against cancel culture. And then they're like, to watch them going on these tours of like, Rogan shouldn't have Daryl Cooper on anymore and all this. You're like, yeah, but come on, dude. Now, what are you? You just kind of, you exposed yourself for being exactly what you claim not to be. And that is something that people don't get over easily.
Right. Well, and no one's really on their side on that, because Douglas Murray, when he said, well, have you been to Gaza and all these other types, the appeal to authority, it's like, in a way, this is just another chapter and kind of like a larger saga that goes back to COVID, Ukraine, Trump even, which is that, we're led to believe that these institutions they have the authority to tell us what's going on and what to think and what's acceptable. And we know that they lied about all that, lied about the facts, the opinions. They were probably not even in good faith. And now they want to come out and tell us, well, but like you said, we can't have that conversation, or Daryl Cooper's too far, or they're doing the same thing to him that they did to you, where they said, well, you're not a historian. And it's like, okay, well, neither is really anybody. Does anybody have the right to critically think, or to read books or to offer an opinion? Or are we literally just going to be told this is what you're allowed to think because, we're the experts?
Well, it's also the other thing, dude, because I'm like, I got in this, well, I guess not. I mean, you were doing your thing, I think, at the time too. But for whatever reason, I got in like at not really in, but I was doing shows at Fox News for a while. There were like a few particular hosts who were really good to me and had me on. It was like Kennedy and she had a libertarian show there, so it made sense. And then Greg Gutfeld used to put me on. Tom Shalhoub used to put me on. So this is like back even in the day. And then I've done a bunch of their shows since. And it's like, one of the things that just bugs me about the whole conversation too is you're like, look, I'm not saying there's a lot of garbage online, so I'm not like defending, there's dumb political commentators online. But when you're talking about like the elite level, or like I'm just saying, objectively speaking, I used to do those panels. If you go back and look at any of the panels I was on, you're out there somewhere, it's just always me carving everybody up because they don't know anything. Right. Like it was, dude, me and you are, compared to the old guard, elite level. Like they maybe would occasionally get someone in there. Occasionally you'd have Pat Buchanan on a segment. You'd have someone who, like Ron Paul, or someone who really knew what they were talking about. But like every day on cable news. So the idea of being like, well, you're not an expert. Daryl Cooper's not an expert. Do you know what you're hearing on cable news? Do you know how much more Daryl Cooper knows than 99.99% of people talking about the topic? So there was something about that really bugged me. But I also think specifically with Jordan Peterson, I just thought it was like, dude, you're talking about a young man. You're talking about a following of young people. I thought your whole thing was like sticking up for them, not calling them the tetrad of evil or something like that. Yeah. And not like as if you've done something unforgivable that you are now. It's like, I thought, like, it just seems like, okay, so then if you're saying that Nick Fuentes is leading these young men down the wrong path, well, then, okay, maybe they could use some Jordan Peterson in their life then, right?
Right.
Like what? Maybe you should take that. Maybe it's really important. I thought you're supposed to speak up for the voiceless and get all emotional and all that. Like, where did all that shit go? All of a sudden, there's one thing that's like a subject you're not allowed to talk about. And I just think that's bullshit.
Yeah, well, and Jordan, he even took it a step further. I don't know if you saw his tweets about me, but he called me a rat. He said, Nick Fuentes is a rat. And then he came back and amended it and said, no, wait, he's not a rat because rats are odious by their nature. He said, Nick chooses to be a rat. He's lower than rat. And it's like, and by the way, isn't his whole thing like about totalitarianism and like dehumanizing people? And I said to him, I really was more just like astounded, like you said, because he is different than the others. That's like, he's always been different. Shapiro's like an insane Zionist, like operative of Israel, whatever you want to say. But Peterson, like you said, he really was very influential for young men. And I know that because I was one of them at one point, and I had close friends that loved his Bible lecture series, his podcast, Maps of Meaning, which was his original book.
Pulled a lot of young kids away from atheism.
Major, and towards Christianity and towards conservatism and all of it. And you're right, his claim to fame was that he was supposed to be this like lodestar for the disaffected young men of the Trump generation. And who represents that more than me? I'm kind of like that archetypal guy leading those people. And I agree, if he's got some issue with me, first of all, why not just call me out? It's this weird like thing that the left does where they say, we don't want to platform him, we don't want to give him attention. But like you say, what then happened to that whole deal where it's like, it's a free marketplace, we have to just talk or else we'll fight, we have to, have this marketplace. So there's just layers of hypocrisy and no one's buying. Nobody's buying into that nonsense. And it's sad because I think he lost a lot of credibility by doing that.
I completely agree. And I agree it's sad. And I think, and I'm not saying this again to pick on Jordan Peterson. It's just like, I think he's an important figure. It's an important topic. And it does, and this kind of goes to the heart of, back in the before we ever met. I mean, we just met in person for the first time, but before I ever had you on my show, I had talked to some of the alt-right guys. Like I had Christopher Cantwell on my show, I think a couple times, and I had Richard Spencer on, and I had like some of those guys, and people at the time, it was like it was a somewhat risky move. It was still in the world where you were like, I don't want to get my channel banned and stuff like that. At least at the moment, that feels a little bit safer. But one of the reasons why I liked talking to those guys, or one of the reasons why I did the shows with them, was that, well, first of all, I did kind of find the ideas interesting. And I'm interested in the ideas. That's why we do these things. That's why we do what we do. And there was also, I guess I've always thought there was, like from my perspective as like a libertarian, but a right-wing libertarian, I think. And at least comparatively speaking, I always thought that there was this weird, like I used to talk about this way back in the day when I in like 2012, I was doing podcasts. No one was listening, but I was doing podcasts. And I used to talk about this. This is like totally in the it was before wokeism really became a thing. And then, of course, before the reaction to wokeism became a thing. But even back in like 2012, I used to always say that the president of the United States could like drop a bomb on a third world country on a wedding and like kill 70 people. And then the same day he could say the blacks instead of African Americans. And the latter would be a bigger scandal than the prior. And like there's something fundamentally wrong with that. Like that's a really sick thing about your society.
Yeah.
And there is this almost like, and I think has been for my entire lifetime, maybe before that probably, that there's almost this unspoken cultural value that clearly is a left-wing value that puts at the absolute top of the hierarchy of outrages bigotry. Like bigotry is supposed to be up here at the absolute. That's the worst thing in the world that you can be. When in fact, like that is just not my moral outlook on the world. Yeah, bigotry is something we all have in excess. I think it's bad, but there's much worse things than that. And one of the things that I always found very interesting was that the alt-right guys were really anti-war. And this also for you and the Groypers are very anti-war. And so to me, in my world, like war is really a much worse thing than racism. Yeah. I'm not sure how there's a counter argument to that, although we treat it like war is that's just policy, and this is the worst thing you can do. And so I immediately rejected that. And so in fact, with the Jordan Peterson thing, I'll leave him alone after this, but it's like, you want to talk about psychopaths? Like, sir, you were on record saying, give them hell. That was your response. And for the guy who talks about hell all the time.
Yeah, right.
There's you don't think hell it really exists? It does. You haven't met enough. Yeah, go to Gaza. Hell does exist. You said give them hell, and that's exactly what they got. Like, so, maybe examine yourself before you're saying, oh, but he said a thing about the Jews, so he's the dark tetrad. But then it just seemed to me on top of that. So that's like my worldview. Like, I don't actually think bigotry is the worst thing. I think it can be bad, but I don't think it's the worst thing. But then even from like, say, a liberal worldview, like, isn't like Daryl Davis like the big hero story? And I'm not like claiming that that's what I'm doing with you. It's not.
Right.
But like the idea of like, you're like, even the guy who you say is the famous guy who like converted all the Klansmen, well, he did it by talking to him and being decent. Just be cool. That's like rule number one. Like always, and that always seems so obvious to me, particularly as a Jewish person, but I just like as a Jew, I would say that. But that you're just like, oh, there's these people who hate Jews. I was like, well, I should probably be cool. Because it's kind of hard for people to hate someone who's cool to them. And it's just so weird to me that everybody else's opinion is like, no, this is the one thing that's unacceptable, bigotry. Anything, the government just passed a law that says they can detain you without charges, whatever. But like no one's being a bigot about it, right? They're doing it to whites and blacks equally. Like, okay. And then number two, like, what is this thing that we ought to shut people out of the conversation? It just seems so counterproductive and stupid.
Well, and it's not even just bigotry. In particular, it's words. It's not like you even have to do a bigoted thing like you beat up a black person for being black or you discriminate actively. It's like if you have said something that sounds racist, is racist, that is worse than murder, war, etc. And that was kind of like a phenomenon this summer because I was so outspoken against the war in Gaza and the clips were going around on TikTok and Instagram. And a lot of liberals are saying, wait a second. even he is saying this is evil. This is a guy we're supposed to hate. You know, maybe the broken clock is right twice a day. And I was on my show reminding people like, yeah, maybe I'm racist. Maybe we disagree on issues of race, but I'm against murder. I'm against genocide. And like you said, is that not the actual moral paradigm? Is like killing, war, famine, you know, are these things not the real evils? And maybe bigotry is somewhere further away from that, and saying things that might be bigoted further even still from that. And we live in a society now where it seems like if you have ever uttered anything that's bad, it haunts you.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you look at my Wikipedia page, and it's like, he's a racist, sexist, homophobe, Islamophobe. In 2018, he said this. In 2020, he said that. Right. And I go on shows, and in the news reports, they list like things I have said. It's like I do a talk show. Yeah. I talk 3 hours a day for a living for 10 years, and sometimes it sounds controversial or provocative or offensive, but doesn't that kind of go with the territory of freedom of conscience? If we can think, should we not be able to speak? And if we speak, can we not be wrong? Can we not be funny? Can we not be insensitive or bombastic? And I guess this gets to something about, because you think, well, society shouldn't be this way, but why is it this way? People are hanged by their words selectively. This is like, these are tools of reputational destruction. They don't like where you're pointed, so then they look for things that are going to hurt people's feelings and say, oh, well, you shouldn't listen to this guy because he said this, and I bet you don't like how that sounds, huh? Because when you look at, I brought this up on PBD, Ben Shapiro in the year 2000, I think, wrote an article about ethnic cleansing. It said transfer is not a dirty word. Yep. And he's arguing for literal ethnic cleansing. Now, I have never argued anything close to that. I've never made the argument that we should ethically cleanse blacks from the United States. But if I did, I'd be hanged by that forever. Yeah. Is Shapiro. Why and why not? He is not reminded of that every time he goes around, not because he apologized for it 20 years later, but because he has all the correct opinions. He's 100%. Not a target. He's got backing. And so that kind of tells us that, and by the way, the same applies to all other kinds of scandals. If we want to have an open society, and that's ironic coming from me, but we do need
libertarian Nick Fuentes.
Yeah, sort of. It's like you do need some level of tolerance, actually, to inoculate yourself from using reputational destruction for political control, because that's what I've come to realize about it.
So I hope you enjoyed that clip. As Nick and Dave Smith were talking about, you know, there's a big movement on the right wing that can be harnessed to go against Israel and their propaganda. It seems like the majority of the right wing, at least the male right wing, has woken up to the fact that Israel is controlling institutions within the American government, social institutions. And now, as we've seen recently, Larry Ellison is leading a group to actually purchase TikTok and control. Benjamin Netanyahu said in a press conference about 1 week ago that the most powerful weapon nowadays in modern warfare is social media, specifically TikTok. And now with those two things combining, people can see that it's overt repression of opinions on the internet that is going to be that is dawning on the American right. And we need to make sure that we're speaking up against this, we're fighting against it. But with that comes a lot of right-wing commentators that haven't really had a strong position against Israel, or have maybe even been pro-Israel. People like Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is, you know, if you've been on the internet for even a day, he rose to prominence in around 2015 to 2016. He started speaking up against wokeness. He had university lectures talking about personality. He was a trained clinical psychologist. And that's when I actually, you know, I think I found his podcast around 2018, and I really grew to enjoy his work and his words. And he was a very relevant voice during Trump's first term, and he was a very outspoken guy on the right who would channel a lot of right-wing energy. And I think, like Nick talks about here, Jordan Peterson was one of the people that woke him up to the right-wing agenda, so to speak. And I think he's been a very vital right-wing soldier throughout the years. However, since he started working for Daily Wire, since his illness back a couple years ago when he was pretty much indisposed for months, really, he's kind of changed. His opinions have changed. I enjoy some of his biblical lectures, but I think some of them are superfluous. I think that his his very fervent support of Israel and their genocide that they're committing on Palestinians has really tarnished his name. However, this isn't the end for him. Before this video ends, actually, I just wanted to say Michaela Peterson, his daughter, who I don't really like at all. I don't like Jordan Peterson very much for the past couple years. I don't like his opinions. I don't agree with much of what he says. I think he's changed a lot. However, Michaela Peterson, his daughter, just came out with a video talking about how his autoimmune disorder, his seemingly mysterious disease, has cropped back up again, and he's in the hospital. And so definitely pray for him. Just because we disagree on these things, right? He's not our enemy, really. He's still the worth of souls is great in the sight of God. And if you don't understand the significance of life, then, what else is there to it? You're no better than the left-wing people celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. So pray for him. This has been a little rant as a little cap on the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to have more clips coming out from this podcast. It was a great chat. If you like this, definitely subscribe. Leave a like. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Do you agree with Jordan Peterson? Do you agree with people that are calling individuals on the right wing the woke right? People like James Lindsay. People like, Mark Levin. Do you agree with them? If you do, let me know in the comments. We'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.